So my name's Richard. I am a developer evangelist with Square. I work on our developer platform promoting our APIs and SDKs for doing payments and commerce apps. And today we're going to talk about securely taking payments in a React Native app. So quickly, just want to ask, how many of you have done something in React Native before? How many of you have done React Native in production? Cool. All right, so a little bit about Square. We'll talk about so we build commerce apps that go beyond payments, and we're trying to get developers to build commerce apps for doing these kinds of things. So this is going to go all the way from not just taking payments, but creating orders, managing customers, doing inventory, and we have APIs and SDKs to facilitate that. So of those different things, there's our in-app payments SDK. That's primarily what we're actually going to be focusing on today. But we also have online payments, in-person payments, and order management. If you ever want to find out more about this, you could always just go to developer.squareup.com. Quick little thing I want to cover on doing payments. Since we're at a mobile conference, it makes a lot of sense to actually talk about when would I use something other than Play Store billing or like Apple's own in-app purchases. So there's a important distinction here because there's a tendency for everyone to want to lean straight into using Play billing. The problem is that a lot of the time, well, I wouldn't say a lot of the times, but there's many times where you're actually not supposed to be using Play Store billing. So if you have a physical good or service, think about if you're an e-commerce store and you're selling items, you wouldn't want to use Play Store billing for doing that charge because they're going to take 30%. If you're doing a gym membership, it seems that could be handled in a digital format, but it's actually a physical service, and so you wouldn't actually do that through Play Store billing. So with us, it's pretty standard in terms of online payments. It's going to be 2.9% plus 30 cents. So vast difference, about 27% in terms of how much you would be changing, would be taking. So you might be asking yourself, can I use a third-party payment provider in the app that I'm integrating? So if it's a physical good, definitely, you can use it. If it's a digital good, it's not the case. So let's say that you have an app where you do ebooks and you're selling ebooks to users, and then you're selling access to that ebook in your app. That's when you have to use Play Store billing, and you can't use us for either. Physical services, this is easier to understand say you create your own food delivery app because you think that you just want to directly compete with DoorDash or something. That is a physical service, so totally use us as a third-party payment provider. Digital service we already kind of covered, if you're doing a subscription. This is actually most easily understood, the reason why you cannot purchase a Netflix subscription in the Netflix app. You actually have to go to their website, get a subscription, and then you could sign in on your app. And that's part of the way that they circumvent that rule. Physical subscriptions, this is just pretty straightforward. It's if you had a magazine or something, a non-digital magazine, that would be the case. If it's a digital magazine like New York Times or something like that, and you're subscribing through the app, that's when you have to use it. So that just kind of covers all the bases for the preliminary questions of when should I actually use payments. So now we're going to kind of more lean into how do you actually do implementing of payments into your application. So the main thing that yeah, go ahead. What's the question? Let me see if I could repeat your question to see if I'm understanding it correctly. So you're talking about if there's a marketplace and you're a consultant and sort of sitting in between the marketplace and the customer, would that be a physical?
Let's say customers will contact lawyers and I'll provide that marketplace. Is it a physical service or digital?
If it's a business, so you're asking like if you were say like lawyers, like you're helping people get connected to lawyers as a service. I'd say that that's like kind of in like that sort of gray area where I think you'd actually be closer to actually using a third-party payment provider, because if you're actually doing some sort of like actual like physical connection between people and these lawyers. But you know, it's one of those things that like I can't give like total 100% advice because it's completely beholden to the approval process of Google Play Store and Apple. But you can try implementing the in-app payments SDK and then submitting to them and like just sort of crossing your fingers. But it really depends on like how that like facilitation is working. If it was like a chat AI and like you're unlocking it in the app, then I would say you'd have to probably use Play Store billing. So in-app payments SDK. I know that this is like about securely taking payments in a React Native app, but this is actually how this happens. So this is what the in-app payments SDK, I just want to be sure that animation's working. So you can actually like see like this is what this does. It's a pre-built UI where we actually like curated and like created all these animations for you. And so all you have to do is provide an interface to this, and then this actually like handles the entire process of like what the user interaction would be. So they're going to enter their credit card information. It will show all these different animations. It'll even handle like error handling in terms of like if they enter incorrect credit card number, it will immediately show that in the UI. So in terms of like how an in-app payments SDK actually works, this is like sort of laying the groundwork of understanding like how this is secure. So we can kind of skip over some of the parts of like setting an application ID. These are like sort of preliminary things, but you see that as we get through the flow and we get into the in-app payments SDK, you can see it like card entry activity, like the first event that we actually see. That's where like they enter credit card number. The important key point here is like they're entering their credit card number directly with Square servers. We have fields that are like basically going to operate kind of like iframes so that this information is going directly to us, so that you as the developer are never seeing this information. And that's entirely by design. You don't ever actually want to see a user's credit card information. So then there is a point at which like they hit pay. That's actually going to request a token. And so we tokenize all that credit card information and send it back to you and give you a token to refer to it. And so the rest of that basically handles that you use that token, you send it to a backend, and then you do all of your processing. You have the options of either storing that credit card on a customer profile, or you can immediately charge it. But the main point here is that we're doing the whole tokenization process. And so that's kind of like where I'm going to sort of touch on like what tokenization is for anyone who's not really familiar. So you can see here on like the far left that you're seeing like this is like the most common case of like when you're adding a card to your Apple Pay or your Google Pay. It's doing the same form of tokenization where it's taking all these sensitive credit card details, it's then sending them off to a bank where they will then create a random generated number that they can like reverse. And then they're sending it back to your card or your phone so that it can actually be stored on your device so that anytime you want to do Apple Pay, it'll use that token, send it off to Apple. Apple will say, oh, we know the credit card details, and like it goes through this entire process. But essentially the token acts as a pointer to that sensitive information so that you can safely transmit this stuff without ever leaking customers' details. And so what are we talking about when we're talking about sensitive details? We're talking about primarily here the PAN, which is the personal account number of that credit card, and then the combined CVV there. It's kind of called a lot of different things depending on the region, but like CAV2, CID. We generally just call it like a CVV. Other components of this are not actually that sensitive. So like cardholder name and the expiration date are generally not considered sensitive. But then you also have like the last four. So that's why like whenever you go into any kind of application, you could always see like the last four, your expiration, and your name on a credit card so that you could actually know which credit card of yours you're referring to. So after that point, that's where we're actually going to sort of talk about React Native. So React Native, for anyone who's not familiar with it, it's a cross-platform tool that allows you to learn once, write anywhere. I don't know if that's entirely a true promise of the platform. I can tell that somebody who's actually worked with it can know that that's not always true. But you learn React, and then you can create React components, and then they target down to iOS and Android. And so you could write your application 100% in JavaScript, so they say. One of the main benefits, I think, that you get from React Native, which they used to be sort of exclusive in this, but Flutter has kind of like stepped into it, but allowing the hot reloading of components. So that's kind of like the groundwork of that. The reason this is relevant is that the In-App Payments SDK, which we have for iOS and Android, we have a React Native plugin that is a wrapper around both of those SDKs so that it can target either one of those platforms for you. So this is like the part of the workshop where we can just sort of say, here's where you can go to like actually see the getting started example. And this will actually have like a pre-built example app where you can actually create and purchase a cookie using the In-App Payments SDK in React Native. I wanted to actually walk through a real application that I built, and I'm sort of saying real because it's not like I've deployed this to production, but I've actually like created this for the purposes of showing like what is possible. So what I did was I created an order head application where you can actually choose any one of these different Legos, and then when you purchase it, you'd be able to then go pick it up from the Square booth and get your Lego figurine. So here you can actually like see the basic flow of that. We've created a few components and screens to show entering your credit card details, and like at this point, the In-App Payments SDK is actually just sort of taken over, and all of these different events are just hooked into events on React Native. So that's the basic part of it. From here, we're just going to actually go into the application that I built. And if anybody has questions at any point throughout this, feel free to just dive in, or if there's a topic that you're more interested in. Because this is a workshop, I'm totally open to going into any topic that you want. But for now, I'll just sort of walk through the app that I've built. And also, please let me know if you need the text on this to be any bigger. So here is a basic React Native app. Let's actually just go look at like the base of this. So here we're just pulling in some basic standard components that you would actually have. You can use Create React Native App to actually scaffold out an entire app. The only thing I would forewarn is that I'm pretty sure that that uses Expo. So if you tried to implement ours, it wouldn't necessarily work because Expo doesn't support native libraries. So you'd have to do like the standard getting started with native modules that they have on the React Native website. But once you do that, you basically get like a standard implementation here. The only thing I've added is React navigation to sort of make some sanity in the routing of this application. And then we're kind of just pulling in the different screens that we've created, and I'll dive into those further. Initially, we just have our stack of different screens that we've created, so you can like push and pop off the stack as you're navigating throughout the application. And then, going a little bit fast here. Then we actually just have the place where we're initializing the In-App Payments SDK. So this is as simple as just after you've installed the React Native Square In-App Payments. That is like quite the mouthful for a module. But yeah, you import the React Native Square In-App Payments and SPIQ core, and then that's actually what you use for initializing the application. So the only thing that you really need to provide here is an application ID that you get from your developer dashboard in Square. What this actually functions as is a way to identify which app am I trying to take payments for. So this becomes very relevant as you try to request tokens from our backend. In our platform, we call them nonces. But as you request those tokens, we need to know which applications are these tokens allowed to be processed for. Because if you have a mismatch between an application ID and the backend, then we know oh, somebody's trying to intercept tokens and trying to process things that they shouldn't. So that's how we isolate all of the risk into a single application. So once we have this initialized on our basic routes of the app, we can actually like take a look at the main home screen. So in the home screen, here we're actually just pulling in a bunch of different components. These are going to work similar to like what you would have in an Android application. There's a view, an image, touchable highlight field area that's basically going to be like a button, and touchable without feedback. These are just sort of implemented to create like all of those different UI elements that you've seen. Then we also have the modal for actually creating that pop-up that you see later on. But the rest of this is just sort of like managing state as you would in like a typical React component. So we have like the catalog, whether or not the modal should be visible, and then like what the current modal item is. So here I don't know if it's like necessarily a hack, but the modal is like a single component, and then every time that you click on an item, I'm actually populating the state with that catalog item to show that within the modal as it's being generated. Then we have this state feature. This is actually just pulling in all of the different catalog items from my Square catalog. So all of this actually works without any form of a database. I'm actually just fetching from a Square account and saying, give me all of the items that they have in their catalog, in which case I just have a bunch of Lego figurines. And then I'm just parsing that JSON, and then from there setting it in my catalog. After that, we can actually skip the nav options. And then you'll actually see that in here, we're actually going through and not showing our catalog until we actually have something populated in there. And then from there, it's actually just iterating over every catalog item and then creating a little view with a touchable element on it. I'm going to sort of pause here because I feel like I'm like brushing through a lot of things for people who might not be as familiar with React Native. Anybody have questions about anything so far? What I'll do is I'll actually pull up Android Studio, and then this will make a lot more sense if I actually just fire up the application. So in order to actually run a React Native app, you can actually just use the CLI, and in my project, I'm just going to do React Native run Android, but first, I'm going to start my emulator. So this app was actually designed to be run on a tablet, and I will fully admit that I originally designed this on an iOS tablet. And so you'll actually get to see some of the problems that arise when you try to target between iOS and Android, is that all the components don't render exactly as you would anticipate, and so sometimes you have to create platform-specific styles in order to make it look the same between the two. So here we have that fired up. And so we're going to do React Native run Android. This actually takes quite a while the first time you run it, whenever you're trying to do a React Native project if you've never done it, because it's actually going through and bundling all of your assets from React Native and then creating the components that you're wanting to run and then compiling it all down so that it actually runs as a native application. So we will let this run for a little bit, and I will stall by talking about how annoying this is. Oh, great. Because I've already built this, this didn't take that long. So here then you actually see that Metro Bundler is actually bundling all of these different resources together so that we can actually do like hot loading of the components. Once you actually like build directly onto each one of these platforms for like a production build, this is actually the JavaScript that will be running inside of your Android or iOS application. So it's almost like its own like mini node server that's actually communicating with. So here you can actually see the app. Hopefully that, yeah, it's not too hard to see. So let's go back and show this a little bit more side by side. Can everyone read the code there relatively okay? Or do you want it bigger? Bigger? Okay. See in the back. What we'll do is we'll make this a little bit smaller. And we'll kind of like jump around a little bit here. So this is just, so we'll kind of like go back down a little bit. We'll skip over the part where we're fetching all the data and setting the state because it's kind of obvious that that's going to be there. But then we have, so one of the main parts that you'll see that's a little bit different here. In the nav options, I've just created like a basic global nav. all that is this like little square icon up here. And this is actually not supposed to have this line at the bottom. On iOS, it doesn't show up, but because of the way that styling works in Android, you have to actually create something like a little bit different because of how that component works. You could twist my arm, I probably couldn't tell you exactly why it is without Googling the hell out of it. This part is really just a function that's actually controlling whether or not to have our modal visible. And then this one is actually trying to do the navigation into the order screen. So like after we've actually selected something in the modal, so like we pop up the modal here, and then this other function is gonna fire when we click buy. So it's actually just like hooked onto that. So when I click buy, it'll populate everything that I should be able to see on my order screen. So that's kind of like what you're seeing here. There's just like one main nav with a bunch of like different views of the different components that's being iterated over on that grid. Trying to remember, I don't think there's actually additional parts on that. The rest of this is really just kind of controlling the different components of like the modal animation. So let's actually go into the order screen. So that's actually order, so we'll go to the checkout screen. So the checkout screen is where we're going to after we've said, this is the item that I want. I click buy. And so here's where the bulk of the logic is going to be for actually invoking the in-app payments SDK. So what we have here is you see that we pull in the SQIP card entry. We also have interfaces for digital wallets. The flow is like slightly different, but essentially works in a similar manner. And that like you're going to invoke the native API for like Google Pay or Apple Pay, and then they just click accept, and then you still get a token back. For this, we just have a couple state variables for this is the item that we've selected, and then there's also state for the customer name. So this is like so that we can actually identify the person who's ordered the Lego, so when they show up, we know who to give it to. And then these other functions are actually quite important. On start card entry is going to be the function that we're going to use to start the in-app payments SDK. So once we launch the in-app payments SDK, it essentially creates a whole separate activity in Android or iOS, and so that isolates you from actually interacting with a lot of like the information that's running through that activity. So you don't actually have control over that. You just say start it, and then it will terminate itself when they finish entering their information. There is another function that you can use for like in order to like close out the modal for in-app payments SDK. But that's usually like you would invoke that if like something else in your application says like, hey, halt the entire card entry process. So again, we have the same nav options as we had before. The only change here is that we have a back button. And so here is where we're doing some special stuff, and you can see some of the artifacts of me doing this for iOS. So React Native gives you the ability to just sort of target specific platforms, and so you can gate off your code. And here, iOS is unique in that they let you dynamically set style options for the in-app payments SDK. So like we can change the color or the name of a button, but like that's the extent to which we allow you to customize the in-app payments SDK. In Android, you actually just set this in like the standard way that you would set styles in an Android app. We just have particular files that you can see in the Getting Started guide. This is actually a very important function for on-card nonce request success. So this is a function that we will actually pass into the Square In-App Payments SDK. And what this does is this is actually handling everything that we get back after a customer has entered all of their information into the In-App Payments SDK. So say that they enter all of their credit card information, everything seems good. This will actually send back the nonce that you need to send to your backend. So this is where you're gonna do all of your async requests to say like send to a backend, did it process, was it successful, great. So here I just have an endpoint. This is all on a Google Cloud function. So it's just gonna take this entire payload, post it there, and then I'm just stringifying the nonce, the item, and the customer. So by sending that entire payload, I can then say like, okay, like go create an order for this customer using this credit card. And then I'm just sort of logging things out. But the rest of it is then you just have like this complete card entry. So this is actually like a function where you can sort of treat this as a place to sort of clean up any state. So like if you have, like in like the case of like say a food delivery app, it might be more common that rather than immediately charging a credit card, you would store it on a customer profile. So here you can actually like, once you know that you've successfully received all the credit card details, you can update your app state to say, hey, display that like they have a card on file and here are the detail, like the non-sensitive details that you can display to them. This is just where we actually do any kind of error processing. So like if there was any kind of error with the information, like they gave a wrong zip or a CVV failed, this is where we can show that information back to the user and then have them go back and like re-enter their information in the credit card entry. This is also a function that I didn't implement here, but is just there for if in the event that a user cancels the flow before they actually entered all their card information, like they started to enter their card and they were like, I don't want to do this right now, and they hit X. This can allow you to adjust any other state in your application in case that you've set things up, you want to be able to tear them down again. And this is like that main function I talked about before. This is just a wrapper function to start the entire in-app payments SDK flow. So this is the one that we're actually tying to a button so that it says, go ahead and pay with card. This function is actually just handling change events. It's literally just updating the customer in email so that if you're not familiar with React, you can have all of these input components, but as people try to insert stuff into those inputs, this allows you to read those inputs and put them into the state of a component. So here we're really just pulling in like a first name, last name, email, so that we can send the payload when we actually pay for something. And like that's like kind of like here, if we were able to, I put my name, like that's actually going to change the state in the component. See if I can actually, I know this is probably really hard to read, but because I can't really make that much bigger. But you can actually like start looking at and inspecting these different components and like see if you actually did like do remote debugging using the React dev toolkit, you can actually like see what the state is on each one of these individual components and see like my name's Richard, I have an email address, my cart thing is the Light and Russell Lego person. So we will disable inspector. And so here we're actually just doing like a very similar view to like what we saw before. We have two input fields on the left, we have my items on the right, and then a pay button. And so from there, if we actually hit pay, and I want to go ahead and enter some totally valid credit card data, you can see that we're actually seeing this entire process go through. And then once I click accept here, this is actually going to like make the request to Square. Square sends the tokenized information back, and then like at that point, our function is firing that says, hey, we've gotten a successful nonce request. Let's go ahead and like finish processing. So in this case, what ends up happening is an order is created in some merchant's point of sale that's over at our booth that's going to be able to see, oh, Richard Moot has ordered a Lego figurine and wants to pick it up. That's basically the entire application. If everyone would be interested, we can actually even try to pull up the Quick Start app and show the entire configuration process for that. If not, I'm happy to answer any other questions at the Square booth. If you want to talk in more detail about your application and what you're building. I know this is like a full hour-and-a-half talk. I expected to probably interact with a lot more people in like building their applications, but if nothing else is here, you can feel free to move about the conference. Thank you.